The phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound cutting through the morning quiet at the police station. Officer Miller, halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee, sighed and answered. Police Department, Miller speaking. A frantic voice on the other end blurted out, "My car. It's gone. Stolen." The man sounded genuinely distressed, his words tumbling over each other in a rush. "Okay, sir, calm down," Officer Miller said, trying to soothe the caller. "Tell me your name and address." "It's Peterson, Robert Peterson. 14, Oak Street. My car, my beautiful car, it's just gone." Officer Miller scribbled down the information. "All right, Mr. Peterson, I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what happened. When did you last see your car?" "Last night," Mr. Peterson replied, his voice still shaky. "I parked it in the driveway, like always, around 10 o'clock. This morning, I came out to go to work, and it was just gone. Vanished. The driveway was empty." "What kind of car was it, Mr. Peterson?" "It was a Sapphire Starfire. A limited edition, you know. Deep blue, leather interior, worth a fortune." Mr. Peterson's voice cracked with emotion. Officer Miller knew the type. A seriously expensive piece of machinery. "Okay, Mr. Peterson, I'm going to send an officer to your house to take a report. Please stay there and don't touch anything." He hung up the phone and took another sip of his coffee, the lukewarm liquid doing little to wake him up. Another day, another stolen vehicle. But something about Mr. Peterson's frantic call felt a little off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but a nagging feeling of unease settled in his stomach. He radioed dispatch and requested a patrol car to be sent to 14, Oak Street to investigate a reported vehicle theft. As he waited for confirmation, he pulled up the address on the computer. 14, Oak Street. Nice neighborhood. Big houses, manicured lawns. Definitely the kind of place where someone might own a Sapphire Starfire. A few minutes later, Officer Davies responded, confirming that he was en route to Mr. Peterson's residence. Officer Miller leaned back in his chair, the feeling of unease still lingering. He decided to run a quick check on Robert Peterson. Just to be sure. The computer pinged back a few seconds later. Robert Peterson. Age 45. No prior criminal record. Occupation, accountant. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, something caught his eye. A small note in the system, subject recently filed for bankruptcy. Bankruptcy. That explained the slightly desperate tone in Mr. Peterson's voice. A stolen Sapphire Starfire would be a major blow to someone already struggling financially. Or, could it be a way out? A way to get some much-needed cash from the insurance company? The thought crossed Officer Miller's mind, and he couldn't shake it. He decided to head over to Oak Street himself. He wanted to see Mr. Peterson, and the scene, with his own eyes. He had a feeling this case might be more complicated than it seemed. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, the image of a shiny blue Sapphire Starfire disappearing into thin air playing in his mind. He hoped Mr. Peterson was telling the truth, but something told him that the truth was buried much deeper than a simple car theft. The drive to Oak Street didn't take long. The neighborhood was exactly as Officer Miller had pictured, large, well-kept houses with perfectly green lawns and expensive cars parked in the driveways. He spotted Officer Davies' patrol car parked in front of number 14, a two-story brick house with a neatly trimmed hedge. He parked his car behind Davies and got out, adjusting his belt. As he walked towards the house, he noticed Mr. Peterson standing on the porch, talking to Officer Davies. Mr. Peterson was a tall, thin man with neatly combed brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a crisp white shirt and khakis, looking every bit the part of a successful accountant. Yet, there was a nervous energy about him, a slight twitch in his eye that Officer Miller immediately picked up on. Officer Davies saw him approaching and nodded in greeting. "Morning, Miller. Mr. Peterson was just filling me in." "Morning, Davies," Officer Miller replied. He turned his attention to Mr. Peterson, offering a polite smile. Mr. Peterson, I'm Officer Miller. I just wanted to ask you a few more questions about your car. Mr. Peterson's smile seemed strained. Of course, officer. Anything to help find my car. So, you said you parked it in the driveway last night around 10? Officer Miller began, his eyes scanning the driveway. It was clean and empty, save for a few fallen leaves. That's right, Mr. Peterson confirmed. I always park it there. It's well lit, and I never thought anything like this would happen. Did you hear anything unusual last night? Any noises, any alarms? Mr. Peterson hesitated for a moment. No, nothing. I slept soundly. That's what's so strange. You'd think I would have heard something. Officer Miller circled the driveway slowly, his eyes searching for any signs of forced entry or struggle. He noticed that the security camera above the garage door was pointed slightly upwards, as if it had been deliberately adjusted. Mr. Peterson, is this security camera working? Mr. Peterson followed his gaze. Yes, it is. I check it regularly. It should have captured everything. Could we take a look at the footage? Officer Miller asked, his tone neutral. Mr. Peterson's face seemed to pale slightly. Of course, officer. Come inside. The monitor is in the living room. He led them inside the house, which was impeccably clean and tidy. Everything was in its place, as if it had been staged for a magazine photo shoot. The living room was furnished with expensive-looking furniture and tasteful artwork. It was the kind of house that screamed success, yet Officer Miller couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Mr. Peterson walked over to a large flat-screen television mounted on the wall and fiddled with the remote control. After a few moments, the screen flickered to life, displaying the security camera footage from the previous night. They watched the footage in silence. The driveway was visible, bathed in the soft glow of the security light. Cars occasionally passed by on the street, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, at precisely 2:17 a.m., the camera feed flickered and went black for a few seconds before returning to normal. What was that? Officer Miller asked, pointing to the screen. Mr. Peterson shrugged. I don't know, officer. A glitch, maybe. It happens sometimes. Officer Miller frowned. A glitch at the exact moment the car was supposedly stolen. It seemed too convenient. Can you rewind it a bit, please? Mr. Peterson hesitated again, then reluctantly rewound the footage. They watched the same scene again, and again the camera feed flickered and went black at 2:17 a.m. Very strange, Officer Miller said, his eyes narrowing. Very strange indeed. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that Mr. Peterson wasn't telling the whole truth. A glitch, huh? Officer Davies chimed in, his voice laced with skepticism. He had been quiet until now, letting Officer Miller take the lead. That's some pretty convenient timing for a glitch, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what to tell you, officers. I'm just as surprised as you are. Maybe the camera needs to be serviced. Maybe, Officer Miller replied, his eyes still fixed on the screen. He replayed the footage one more time, focusing on the brief moment the screen went black. It was just a few seconds, but it was enough. Enough time for someone to disable the camera, move the car, and then reactivate it. He turned to Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, you mentioned you were an accountant, right? Yes, that's correct, Mr. Peterson replied, his voice a little higher pitched than before. So, you're good with numbers, with money? Officer Miller pressed. I'd like to think so, Mr. Peterson said, trying to force a smile. Officer Miller paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Mr. Peterson, I'm going to be straight with you. I ran a background check on you. I know about the bankruptcy. Mr. Peterson's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. A Sapphire Starfire is an expensive car, Mr. Peterson. And insurance payouts can be substantial, Officer Miller continued, his voice calm and measured. Are you telling me that the thought of filing an insurance claim for a stolen car never crossed your mind? Mr. Peterson finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. No, officer. I swear. I would never do something like that. Then explain the glitch in the security footage, Officer Miller challenged. Explain why you didn't hear anything last night. Explain why you seem so calm for someone who just had their expensive car stolen. Calm. Mr. Peterson protested. I'm not calm. I'm devastated. That car was my pride and joy. Devastated people usually show a little more emotion, Mr. Peterson, Officer Davies interjected, his voice firm. They don't stand around giving polite explanations and talking about servicing security cameras. Officer Miller nodded in agreement. Mr. Peterson, we're going to need to take a closer look around your property. We're going to need to search the house and the grounds. Mr. Peterson's eyes widened in panic. Search? You can't just search my house. You need a warrant. We can get a warrant, Mr. Peterson, Officer Miller said, his voice unwavering. And if we do, it'll make things a lot more difficult for you. But if you cooperate with us now, maybe we can clear this whole thing up quickly. He paused, giving Mr. Peterson a chance to speak. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. Finally, Mr. Peterson sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, he said, his voice barely audible. Okay, you can look around. But I swear, I have nothing to hide. Officer Miller exchanged a look with Officer Davies. He didn't believe Mr. Peterson for a second, but he knew that allowing them to search the property was a step in the right direction. He had a feeling that the truth was hidden somewhere on this property, and he was determined to find it. He turned to Davies. Davies, start with the backyard. Check the perimeter. I'll take the garage. As they began their search, Officer Miller couldn't help but wonder where the Sapphire Starfire was hidden. And more importantly, how far Mr. Peterson was willing to go to get the insurance money. He had a feeling they were about to find out. As Officer Davies headed towards the backyard, Officer Miller began his search of the garage. The garage was just as meticulously organized as the rest of the house. Tools hung neatly on the wall, and various cleaning supplies were arranged on shelves. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no indication that a car had been hastily removed. He opened the trunk of Mr. Peterson's other car, a sensible sedan, and found it empty. He checked under the floor mats, in the glove compartment, even under the hood, but found nothing suspicious. He was beginning to wonder if he was wrong about Mr. Peterson. Maybe the car really had been stolen, and the glitch in the security footage was just a coincidence. But then, he remembered the bankruptcy. He pictured Mr. Peterson, sitting in his pristine living room, worrying about bills, about losing everything he had worked so hard for. The Sapphire Starfire, a symbol of his success, now a burden, a financial albatross around his neck. The insurance payout would be a lifeline, a chance to start over. He walked back into the house, finding Mr. Peterson standing nervously in the living room, watching Officer Davies through the window as he searched the backyard. Mr. Peterson, Officer Miller said, his voice low. Let's talk about the insurance. How much coverage did you have on the Sapphire Starfire? Mr. Peterson hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. Full coverage, he mumbled. The maximum amount. And how much would that be, roughly? Officer Miller pressed. I don't know exactly, Mr. Peterson stammered. Maybe, $80,000. Maybe more. $80,000. Enough to pay off his debts, to keep his house, to breathe a little easier. Officer Miller could almost see the temptation in Mr. Peterson's eyes. Mr. Peterson, let's say, hypothetically, that you were in financial trouble. Let's say that you were desperate for money. Wouldn't $80,000 be a pretty tempting solution? Mr. Peterson shook his head vehemently. No, officer. I would never do anything illegal. I'm an accountant. I'm a law-abiding citizen. But you're also bankrupt, Mr. Peterson, Officer Miller pointed out. And desperate people do desperate things. He paused, letting his words sink in. Tell me, Mr. Peterson, did you have any debts? Any bills you couldn't pay? Anything that might have pushed you over the edge? Mr. Peterson remained silent, his face pale and drawn. Officer Miller could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to decide whether to confess or to continue to deny everything. Just then, Officer Davies came back into the house, his face grim. Miller, you need to see this. I found something in the backyard. Officer Miller followed Davies outside, leaving Mr. Peterson standing alone in the living room, his secret about to be revealed. As he walked towards the backyard, he knew that whatever Davies had found was going to change everything. He just didn't know how much. The insurance money, the bankruptcy, the security camera glitch, it was all starting to come together. And he had a feeling that the truth was going to be a lot more complicated, and a lot more dangerous, than he had initially thought. Officer Miller followed Officer Davies to the far corner of the backyard, where a section of the neatly manicured lawn looked different. The grass was a slightly different shade of green, and the soil appeared to be recently disturbed. It was subtle, but to a trained eye, it was obvious that something had been buried there. What do you think? Davies asked, his voice low. Looks like our friend Mr. Peterson has been doing some gardening, Officer Miller replied, his eyes scanning the area. But I doubt he was planting flowers. He knelt down and examined the patch of dirt more closely. The soil was loose and crumbly, and there were faint tire tracks leading to and from the area. Tire tracks that matched the width of the Sapphire Starfire. Let's get a warrant, Officer Miller said, standing up. We need to dig this up. He pulled out his radio and contacted dispatch, requesting a warrant to search and excavate the area. As he waited for confirmation, he thought about the other pieces of the puzzle that weren't adding up. He had already sent another officer to canvass the neighborhood, checking security cameras and talking to neighbors. But nobody had seen or heard anything suspicious. No witnesses, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a car being driven away. It was as if the Sapphire Starfire had simply vanished into thin air. He thought about Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived next door to Mr. Peterson. She had a clear view of his driveway from her living room window, and she was usually awake late, watching television. But she hadn't seen anything. She had told the officer that she had gone to bed early last night because she wasn't feeling well. Then there was Mr. Johnson, who lived across the street. He was a retired truck driver who always kept an eye on the neighborhood. He hadn't seen anything either. He said he had been out of town visiting his daughter. It was all too convenient. Too perfect. It was as if Mr. Peterson had planned everything meticulously, ensuring that there would be no witnesses, no evidence to contradict his story. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated Officer Miller's intuition. And he had underestimated the power of a keen eye and a little bit of luck. The radio crackled to life, and dispatch confirmed that the warrant had been approved. Officer Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew that they were about to uncover the truth, one way or another. He turned to Officer Davies. Let's get some shovels. It's time to see what Mr. Peterson has been hiding in his backyard. As they walked back towards the house, they passed Mr. Peterson, who was standing on the porch, watching them with a look of growing despair. He knew that the game was up. He knew that his carefully constructed lie was about to crumble. And he knew that he was about to face the consequences of his actions. But even as the walls closed in around him, Officer Miller couldn't help but feel a little bit of sympathy for Mr. Peterson. He was just a desperate man who had made a terrible mistake. A mistake that was about to cost him everything. The shovels felt heavy in their hands as Officer Miller and Officer Davies approached the disturbed patch of soil. The sun beat down on their backs, adding to the tension that hung in the air. Mr. Peterson watched from the porch, his face a mask of anxiety. He knew what they were about to find. But before they could even sink their shovels into the ground, a low whirring sound filled the air. It was the police department's drone, hovering above the property. "Hold up," Officer Miller said, raising his hand. "Let's see what the drone can see." The drone operator, stationed back at the police station, was using the drone's high-resolution camera to get a better view of the area. He zoomed in on the patch of disturbed soil, then slowly panned across the rest of the backyard. "I'm seeing something else," the operator's voice crackled over the radio. "Near the back fence. There's another area of disturbed soil, smaller than the first one, but definitely something there." Officer Miller and Officer Davies exchanged glances. They hadn't noticed the second patch of soil. It was hidden beneath the shade of a large oak tree, almost invisible from ground level. "Can you get a closer look?" Officer Miller asked. The drone operator maneuvered the drone closer to the back fence, focusing the camera on the second patch of soil. The image on the radio screen sharpened, revealing a small pile of dirt and a few scattered leaves. "Looks like something was recently dug up and reburied," the operator said. "Maybe a small object, or maybe something else." Officer Miller felt a surge of excitement. He had a feeling that the second patch of soil was the key to solving the mystery. It was too small to bury a car, but it could be big enough to bury something else. Something important. "Okay," Officer Miller said, turning to Officer Davies. "Let's split up. You start digging here, at the bigger patch. I'll check out the area near the fence." He walked towards the back fence, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the second patch of soil, he could see that it was even more disturbed than he had initially thought. The soil was loose and dark, and there were several small indentations in the ground, as if something heavy had been pressed into it. He knelt down and began to dig with his hands, carefully removing the top layer of dirt. As he dug deeper, he felt something hard and smooth. He brushed away the remaining soil, revealing a small, rectangular object wrapped in a plastic bag. He carefully unwrapped the bag, revealing a set of car keys. Not just any car keys. Sapphire Starfire car keys. The keys to Mr. Peterson's stolen car. Officer Miller stood up, holding the keys in his hand. He looked back at Mr. Peterson, who was still watching from the porch, his face now pale with fear. "I think we found what we were looking for, Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller said, his voice loud and clear. "And I don't think it's going to help your case." He knew that finding the keys was the final piece of the puzzle. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Mr. Peterson had lied about his car being stolen. And it meant that he was about to face some serious consequences. The drone's eye view had revealed the truth, a truth that Mr. Peterson had tried so hard to conceal. But in the end, the truth always finds a way to surface. Even if it's buried beneath a pile of dirt. With the car keys in hand, Officer Miller knew they had enough evidence to arrest Mr. Peterson. But he still needed to find the car. He turned to Officer Davies, who was standing beside the larger patch of disturbed soil, shovel in hand, looking confused. "Davies, we need to dig this up," Officer Miller said, gesturing towards the larger patch. "I have a feeling we're going to find something interesting." Davies nodded and plunged his shovel into the ground, lifting a large clump of dirt. They dug in silence for several minutes, the only sound the rhythmic scraping of shovels against the earth. The hole grew deeper and wider, but they still hadn't found anything. "Maybe we were wrong," Davies said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe the car isn't here." "We're not wrong," Officer Miller replied, his voice firm. "Keep digging." They continued to dig, their muscles aching, their faces covered in dirt. Just when they were about to give up hope, Davies' shovel struck something hard. "I think I found something," he exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. They both dropped to their knees and began to dig with their hands, carefully removing the remaining soil. Slowly, a dark shape began to emerge from the earth. It was large and rectangular, and it was covered in mud and dirt. "What is it?" Davies asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. Officer Miller didn't answer. He knew exactly what it was. He had a feeling that he had known all along. They continued to dig, exposing more and more of the object. Finally, they had uncovered enough to reveal its true identity. It was the Sapphire Starfire. Mr. Peterson's stolen car. But it wasn't just sitting there. It was buried. Completely buried beneath several feet of dirt. Officer Miller stared at the buried car in disbelief. He had suspected that Mr. Peterson was trying to commit insurance fraud, but he had never imagined that he would go to such extreme lengths. Burying a car was a lot of work, and it was incredibly risky. What if someone had seen him? What if the police had found the car before he could file the insurance claim? He shook his head in amazement. Mr. Peterson was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Or maybe a little bit of both. He stood up and walked towards the porch, where Mr. Peterson was still watching, his face now a picture of utter despair. "Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller said, his voice calm but firm. "I think you have some explaining to do." He gestured towards the buried car. "Care to tell me why your Sapphire Starfire is buried in your backyard?" Mr. Peterson didn't say anything. He just stood there, his mouth agape, his eyes filled with fear. He knew that he had been caught. He knew that his carefully constructed lie had finally crumbled. And he knew that he was about to face the consequences of his actions. Officer Miller placed Mr. Peterson under arrest for insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. As they led him away in handcuffs, Officer Davies began the long and arduous task of excavating the buried car. It was going to take a while, but they had all the time in the world. They had caught their man, and they had found the stolen car. Justice was about to be served. As Officer Miller led Mr. Peterson towards the patrol car, Mr. Peterson finally broke his silence. I can explain," he stammered, his voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." Officer Miller stopped and turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. "Oh really? Then please, enlighten me, Mr. Peterson. Explain why your expensive car is buried in your backyard like some kind of time capsule." Mr. Peterson wrung his hands, his eyes darting around nervously. I was going to report it stolen. I swear. But then I panicked. I didn't know what to do." "You panicked and decided to bury it?" Officer Miller asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's your story?" "No. I mean, yes. But, it was all a mistake. A terrible mistake." Mr. Peterson pleaded. "I was under so much pressure. The bankruptcy, the bills. I just wasn't thinking straight. So, you dug a giant hole in your backyard, buried your car, and then called the police to report it stolen, all because you weren't thinking straight?" Officer Miller asked, incredulous. "That's quite a lapse in judgment, even for someone facing financial difficulties." Mr. Peterson's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew that his excuses sounded ridiculous, even to himself. But he was desperate. He was trying to salvage what was left of his life. "Look, officer," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know I messed up. I know I did something stupid. But I'm not a bad person. I just made a mistake. A mistake that could land you in jail for a long time," Officer Miller pointed out. "Insurance fraud is a serious crime, Mr. Peterson. And obstructing a police investigation only makes things worse." He paused, giving Mr. Peterson a chance to speak. But Mr. Peterson just stood there, silent and defeated. Officer Miller sighed and shook his head. "Let's go, Mr. Peterson. You can explain everything to the judge." As they walked towards the patrol car, Officer Davies approached them, his face covered in mud and grime. He had managed to partially excavate the buried car, and it was a sorry sight. The once shiny blue sapphire Starfire was now covered in dirt and scratches. It was clear that it had been through a lot. "I've seen better days," Davies said, shaking his head. "I don't think this baby's going to be hitting the road anytime soon." He turned to Mr. Peterson, a look of disgust on his face. "How could you do this to such a beautiful car? It's a crime, that's what it is." Mr. Peterson just hung his head in shame. He knew that he had ruined his car, his reputation, and his life. All for a few dollars. As Officer Miller placed Mr. Peterson in the back of the patrol car, he couldn't help but feel a little bit of pity for him. He was just a man who had made a series of bad decisions, and now he was paying the price. But Officer Miller also knew that justice had to be served. And he was determined to make sure that Mr. Peterson faced the consequences of his actions. He closed the door of the patrol car and turned to Officer Davies. "Let's get this car out of here," he said. "And then let's go home. I'm tired of digging in the dirt." As they drove away, leaving the excavated hole and the mud-covered sapphire Starfire behind, Officer Miller couldn't help but wonder what had driven Mr. Peterson to such desperate measures. Was it really just the money? Or was there something else going on? He knew that he would probably never know the full story. But he also knew that he had done his job. He had caught the bad guy, and he had recovered the stolen car. And that was all that mattered. Back at the police station, Mr. Peterson sat alone in the interrogation room, the stark fluorescent lights casting long shadows on his face. He fidgeted nervously in his chair, his hands cuffed to the table. He had been given a phone call to his lawyer, but hadn't seemed to take much comfort from the conversation. Officer Miller entered the room, carrying a file folder and a cup of coffee. He placed the folder on the table and sat down across from Mr. Peterson. "All right, Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller said, his voice calm and professional. "Let's go over this one more time. Tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning." Mr. Peterson hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I already told you, officer. I reported my car stolen. That's it." "That's not what I found in your backyard, Mr. Peterson," Officer Miller replied, his voice firm. "I found your car buried under several feet of dirt. And I found the keys buried near the back fence. Care to explain that?" Mr. Peterson's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Mr. Peterson, I know you're in a tough situation," Officer Miller continued, his voice softening slightly. "But the truth will set you free. The longer you keep lying, the worse it's going to get for you." He paused, giving Mr. Peterson a chance to speak. "Tell me what happened, Mr. Peterson. Tell me why you buried your car." Mr. Peterson sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He knew that he couldn't keep lying. The evidence was overwhelming. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." He took a deep breath and began to tell the story, his voice trembling with emotion. He told Officer Miller about the bankruptcy, about the mounting bills, about the pressure he was under to provide for his family. He told him about the sapphire Starfire, a symbol of his success that had become a financial burden. "I was desperate, officer," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I reported the car stolen, I could get the insurance money and pay off my debts. It was a stupid idea, I know. But I wasn't thinking straight." He told Officer Miller about how he had disabled the security camera, dug the hole in his backyard, and buried the car under the cover of darkness. He told him about how he had hidden the keys near the fence, hoping that the police would never find them. "I know it was wrong," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I know I messed up. But I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to save my family." Officer Miller listened patiently, without interrupting. He could see that Mr. Peterson was genuinely remorseful. He could see the pain and regret in his eyes. But he also knew that what Mr. Peterson had done was wrong, and that he had to face the consequences. "Mr. Peterson, I understand that you were under a lot of pressure," Officer Miller said, his voice gentle but firm. "But that doesn't excuse what you did. You committed insurance fraud, and you obstructed a police investigation. Those are serious crimes, and you're going to have to answer for them." He paused, giving Mr. Peterson a chance to respond. But Mr. Peterson just sat there, silent and defeated, his head in his hands. Officer Miller sighed and shook his head. He had heard it all before. Desperate people doing desperate things. But that didn't make it right. And it didn't make it any easier to watch. He stood up and walked towards the door. "I'm going to leave you alone for a few minutes, Mr. Peterson," he said. "Think about what you've done. And think about what you're going to tell the judge." He left the room, leaving Mr. Peterson alone with his thoughts and his regrets. He knew that Mr. Peterson's life was about to change forever. And he couldn't help but feel a little bit sad for him. But he also knew that he had done his job. He had uncovered the truth, and he had brought a criminal to justice. And that was all that mattered. As he walked back to his desk, he knew that this was just one case out of many, and that there would always be more bad decisions and broken lives to deal with. But he also knew that he was making a difference, one case at a time. A few hours later, Officer Miller sat in his office, reviewing the case file. Mr. Peterson's confession was complete and detailed, admitting to every aspect of the crime. He had even provided a written statement, outlining his motivations and actions. The district attorney had already been notified, and the wheels of justice were beginning to turn. Mr. Peterson would be arraigned in the morning, and then the long process of legal proceedings would begin. Officer Miller sighed and leaned back in his chair. He had solved the case, and he had brought a criminal to justice. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had only heard Mr. Peterson's side of the story. He hadn't heard from his wife, his children, his friends. He hadn't heard about the pressures and stresses that had driven him to such desperate measures. He knew that Mr. Peterson was not a hardened criminal. He was just a man who had made a series of bad decisions, and who was now paying the price. But he also knew that there were always two sides to every story, and that he had only heard one of them. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. It was Mrs. Peterson's phone number, which he had obtained from the case file. The phone rang several times before a woman answered, her voice. The phone rang several times before a woman answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Mrs. Peterson?" Officer Miller asked gently. "This is Officer Miller with the police department. I apologize for calling so late, but I was hoping to speak with you for a few minutes." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "About Robert?" she finally asked, her voice laced with fear. "Yes, ma'am," Officer Miller replied. "It's about the stolen car." Mrs. Peterson sighed heavily. "I figured," she said. "What happened?" Officer Miller hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. "Mrs. Peterson, we recovered the car," he said. "It was buried on your property." He waited for her reaction, but she remained silent. "Mrs. Peterson, your husband has confessed to filing a false police report and committing insurance fraud," he continued. "He's been arrested." This time, her silence was broken by a sob. "Oh, Robert," she whispered. "What have you done?" Officer Miller felt a pang of sympathy for her. He could only imagine what she was going through. "Mrs. Peterson, I know this must be a difficult time for you," he said. "But I was hoping you could shed some light on what happened. Did you know about your husband's plan?" Another long pause. "No," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I had no idea. He never told me anything." "Did you know about the financial difficulties your family was facing?" Officer Miller asked. "Yes," she said. "I knew things were tight. But Robert always told me he would handle it. He never wanted me to worry." Officer Miller listened patiently as Mrs. Peterson,